You grew up with these people. You defended them when others criticized them. You told anyone who would listen that they were the greatest stars who ever lived. And you were right about the talent. But the people who stood beside them on set knew something about them that the studios made sure you never would. Till now. The Queen who ruled by Fear 2 Academy Awards. A body of work that redefined what screen acting could be. A reputation so formidable that studio executives spoke her name with something approaching reverence. By any measure, Bette Davis was the gold standard of Hollywood's golden age, the actress every young woman in America admired, the performer her peers acknowledged as simply without equal. Fan magazines celebrated her discipline. Directors praised her preparation. And audiences across America adored her with a loyalty that endured decade after decade. So why did so many of her co-stars quietly request, through back channels and careful conversations with casting directors, that they never be placed opposite her again? The answer, those who witnessed it firsthand would eventually say, was not temperament. It was not the volatility of a passionate artist or the impatience of a perfectionist. What Bette Davis practiced on set was something far more calculated than that. A system of psychological management so precise and so consistent that it could not, by any honest accounting, be dismissed as anything other than deliberate. Her rivalry with actress Miriam Hopkins became one of Hollywood's most extensively documented professional relationships. The two women had known each other since their early theater days, and whatever warmth that acquaintance had once produced had long since curdled into something else entirely by the time they appeared together in the 1943 production of Old Acquaintance. Accounts from the period describe Davis timing her most cutting remarks with extraordinary precision, landing them in the moments just before Hopkins needed to deliver close-up work, fracturing her concentration at exactly the points where concentration mattered most. It was not accidental. The timing was too consistent for an accident. But it was co-star Anne Baxter, herself the recipient of an Academy Award for her work in All About Eve, the very film in which she appeared opposite Davis, who eventually provided the clearest and most credible account of what working beside Bette Davis actually meant. Baxter spoke openly in documented interviews about the nature of Davis's behavior, and what she described was not the explosion of a difficult temperament, but the operation of a cold, strategic intelligence. Davis chose her targets. She observed carefully. Those who did not react, who met her provocations with equanimity or simply refused to be moved, were treated with something approaching warmth. Those who flinched, those who revealed, even briefly, that her words had found their mark, became permanent subjects of her attention. What makes Davis's story so endlessly complicated is that the talent was real. The dedication was genuine. The craft she brought to every role she ever played was, by the testimony of everyone who witnessed it, extraordinary. And perhaps that is precisely the point. The cruelty and the genius coexisted in the same person, fed by the same fierce engine of ambition and the same terror of being anything less than the best. Understanding that does not excuse what she did, but it does make her human. And in Hollywood's golden age, humanity, in all its complications, was the one thing the studio system worked hardest to conceal. Bette Davis chose her targets carefully and dismantled them quietly. The next name on this list had no interest in quiet. He had the most powerful voice in America, and he used it, on screen, off screen, and in ways that the people closest to him spent years too frightened to describe. Old Blue Eyes and the Reign of Terror. There has perhaps never been a figure in American entertainment history who combined Frank Sinatra's particular combination of gifts, the voice that could reduce a theater to silence, the screen presence that made every scene feel like an event, the cultural authority that by the 1950s extended far beyond music or film into something approaching national mythology. Your parents adored him. Your grandparents adored him. And in the carefully maintained world of his public image, he was the chairman of the board, charming, generous, the ultimate entertainer who happened to be the most powerful individual in Hollywood. What happened behind that image is a story that the people closest to it spent years too frightened to tell. Sinatra's insistence on performing scenes in a single take is one of the most thoroughly documented facts of his film career. The accepted explanation, repeated in profile after profile, was that Sinatra believed the first take contained a spontaneity and an emotional truth that subsequent repetition could only diminish. It was presented as an artistic philosophy. Those who worked with him understood it as something else. A declaration that his time, his convenience, and his preferences took absolute precedence over every other consideration on any set he occupied. Co-stars who needed additional takes to reach their best work were not offered to them. Directors who requested them did so at considerable professional risk. Shirley MacLaine, who appeared with Sinatra in the 1958 production of Some Came Running, has spoken in interviews and in her published memoir about the atmosphere Sinatra created on set. When MacLaine requested additional takes to develop her performance more fully, the response she received was public, deliberate, and designed to ensure that no one present would miss its meaning. The humiliation was not incidental. It was instructional, a demonstration, performed for the entire crew, of what happened to people who questioned Frank Sinatra's way of doing things. And if public humiliation did not suffice, there were other instruments available. Sinatra's connections throughout the entertainment industry were extensive and thoroughly maintained. Those who complained openly about their experiences working with him discovered, sometimes gradually and sometimes with shocking speed, that doors they had previously walked through without difficulty had quietly closed. No announcement was made. No explanation was offered. The doors were simply no longer open. Director Otto Preminger, who worked with Sinatra on the 1955 production of The Man with the Golden Arm, documented his experiences on that production in terms that paint a precise picture of what Sinatra's presence on a set actually meant for everyone else involved. Sinatra arrived when he chose to arrive. He departed when he chose to depart. The financial consequences of that indifference were absorbed by the studio without complaint, because the alternative, confronting Frank Sinatra about his behavior, was a step that no one in a position of studio authority was willing to take. The voice was real. The talent was genuine. The power was absolute. And beneath every act of dominance was the unmistakable signature of a man who understood, better than almost anyone of his era, that in Hollywood the greatest instrument of control was not a contract. It was fear. Our next star needed none of that institutional infrastructure. He required only a smile, and the most perfectly constructed charm in the history of Hollywood. The charmer who kept score. Consider what it meant to watch Cary Grant, the accent that belonged to no country that actually existed. The physical grace that made every movement seem choreographed by some benevolent authority. The comedic timing was so precise, it appeared effortless, which is the hardest kind of timing to achieve and the easiest kind to underestimate. Grant was not simply a movie star. He was Hollywood's most persuasive argument that elegance was its own form of genius. The charm could be elevated into something approaching art. He was also, according to those who worked most closely with him, a man who tracked every professional slight with extraordinary care and responded to perceived competition with methods so subtle they were nearly invisible. Grant's competitive awareness of how he was received relative to his co-stars is documented in accounts from the period and in subsequent biographical work, including Mark Elliott's thorough examination of his life and career. The pattern those accounts describe is consistent. When Grant felt that a co-star was receiving notices that outshone his own, or that a performance beside him was threatening to claim more than its share of an audience's attention, he adjusted. But the adjustments were never crude. They were architectural, small calibrations to his own performance, shifts in physical positioning, improvisational choices timed with a precision that redirected the camera's sympathies without ever appearing to try. Those who watched him work described a specific tell, the almost imperceptible way he would shift his body weight in the precise moment a co-star reached the emotional peak of a take, drawing the eye of every camera in the room away from the performance being delivered and back to his own face, wearing an expression of perfect, practiced attention. It was not accidental. It was not instinct. It was architecture, executed with the same effortless precision that made his comedic timing so devastating and so impossible to openly accuse. His work on the 1940 production of His Girl Friday, alongside Rosalind Russell, provides what many observers of the period considered the clearest window into this aspect of his professional character. The film is celebrated today for its breathless pace and its brilliant overlapping dialogue, much of which appeared to be spontaneous. Accounts from people familiar with the production suggest that Grant's improvisations, while genuinely witty, were not as spontaneous as they appeared, and that their timing, in particular, bore a consistent relationship to the moments when Russell was building toward her strongest beats. Russell, who was herself a formidably intelligent performer, with every professional reason to understand what was happening, addressed her experience of working with Grant in characteristically careful language. She acknowledged his brilliance without reservation. She was somewhat less forthcoming about everything else. The revelation that reframes Grant entirely is this: his charm was not a mask worn over competitive coldness. It was the competitive coldness, expressed through its most effective available instrument. Those who never challenged him professionally experienced something that everyone who witnessed it described as genuine warmth. He liked people. He was interested in them. He could be extraordinarily kind. But the moment someone's work threatened to eclipse his own, the warmth did not disappear. It simply became a different kind of performance, and it was delivered always with that perfect and unreadable smile. Our next star made absolutely no attempt at elegance, and everyone on her sets felt it as a personal and precisely aimed communication. The perfectionist who broke people. Joan Crawford arrived on set before anyone else. She departed after everyone had gone. She knew every line of her own dialogue and, by most accounts, a considerable portion of everyone else's. Her preparation was legendary. Her dedication was total. And within the world that Hollywood's studio system created and maintained, she represented something that the industry genuinely valued. A professional who treated the work as sacred and held herself to standards that most of her contemporaries could not approach. So why did the crew members assigned to her productions develop a habit of quietly requesting reassignment before filming began? Crawford's control over her professional environment extended well beyond her own performance. Lighting setups that she believed unflattering were challenged and revised. Wardrobe decisions affecting other actors were, on multiple documented occasions, subjects of her direct intervention. The atmosphere on her sets was one of constant vigilance, a feeling reported consistently by those who experienced it, that any element of the production might at any moment become the focus of Crawford's assessment and found wanting. Her rivalry with Norma Shearer during their years together at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer is one of the most thoroughly documented professional competitions in Hollywood history, examined in studio records, contemporary accounts, and multiple histories of the period. And what those accounts reveal is a sustained campaign conducted across years, touching everything from billing disputes to deliberate social maneuvering, that went far beyond the ordinary professional competitiveness of two talented women working within the same studio system. Crawford did not simply want to succeed. She needed, with an urgency that those around her found difficult to fully understand, to be seen as succeeding more completely than anyone beside her. The biographers who examined Crawford's life most carefully arrived at a consistent conclusion, that her perfectionism was never, at its root, about the films she was making. It was about proof. Every production was another opportunity to demonstrate to herself and to the industry that had once dismissed her as a dancing girl with limited prospects, that she had earned her place and could not be moved from it. The insecurity that drove her was real, and it was bottomless, and no amount of professional achievement ever filled it for long. Understanding that does not make the experience of working beside her easier for the people who endured it, but it does transform condemnation into something closer to sorrow, which is perhaps the most honest response available to us now. The girl who had clawed her way to the top of an industry that had underestimated her never stopped fighting the battle she had already won. And every person on her sets paid the price of a conflict they had no part in starting. Crawford's need for control came from a wound she could never fully close. Our next star carried no such wound, and that made her, in her own particular way, even more formidable and even more difficult to withstand, the most dangerous woman in Hollywood. Barbara Stanwyck had earned everything she possessed. That was not a matter of opinion or promotional mythology. It was a documented fact that shaped every dimension of her professional identity. Born in Brooklyn, orphaned young, she had made her way through chorus lines and bit parts and struggling theater productions to become one of the most technically accomplished actresses the American film industry had ever produced. 3 Academy Award nominations, a body of work that ranged from screwball comedy to film noir to Western drama with a completeness that very few performers of any era have matched. The respect she commanded from directors, producers, and fellow actors was not given to her. She had extracted it, one performance at a time, over the course of a career built entirely on craft. And that, precisely, was the problem for anyone who arrived on her set without having done the same. Stanwyck's tolerance for what she perceived as insufficient preparation was, by the consistent testimony of those who witnessed it, essentially non-existent. Actors who arrived without having fully inhabited their roles discovered this quickly. Her corrections, delivered in front of directors and full crews, were not the gentle redirections of a generous mentor. They were precise, they were public, and they were calibrated, whether consciously or not, to instruct not just the individual receiving them, but everyone else present about what standards were expected and what the consequences of failing to meet them would be. Her particular disdain was reserved for performers she believed were substituting charm or physical appeal for actual craft. In an industry that frequently rewarded exactly those qualities, Stanwyck's position was both admirable and, for those on the receiving end of her assessments, genuinely difficult to bear. She never resolved that contradiction. The gap between the standards she demanded of others and her own capacity to deliver those corrections with any generosity of spirit. And the people who bore the weight of it never fully forgot the experience. The Brooklyn orphan who had fought her way to the top of the most competitive industry in the world lived, by all accounts of those who knew her, with a persistent low-level fear that her position was more fragile than it appeared. That someone would look closely enough to discover that she did not quite belong among the people she worked beside. Her harshness toward the underprepared was not simply impatience. It was, at some level that perhaps she herself never fully examined, a preemptive strike against a threat that existed only within herself. Our next star wore his contradictions entirely differently, and the entire industry paid the price for his particular genius. The method behind the madness. In the history of American cinema, there is arguably no single figure who changed the nature of screen performance more fundamentally than Marlon Brando. When he appeared on Broadway in A Streetcar Named Desire in 1947, and then translated that performance to film 4 years later, he did not simply deliver a remarkable portrayal. He demonstrated that something different was possible, that film acting could reach for psychological truth in ways that the polished, technical performances of the studio era had never attempted. His work in On the Waterfront remains, by the assessment of most serious students of the craft, among the 2 or 3 greatest performances in the history of the medium, all of which makes what happened on his sets considerably more difficult to simply condemn. Brando's refusal to memorize his lines, which began as an occasional eccentricity and hardened over the course of his career into an absolute practice, is one of the most thoroughly documented facts about his professional conduct. Co-stars across multiple productions described performing opposite cue cards taped to furniture, to walls, to the bodies of other actors, to whatever surface was nearest and most convenient. The technical challenge this created for everyone else on set was considerable. An actor preparing to deliver a scene of emotional complexity requires a scene partner who is present, who is, in some meaningful sense, actually there. Performing opposite a piece of paper taped to a lamp is a fundamentally different experience, and not an easier one. But the cue cards were, in some respects, the lesser difficulty. More challenging for many of the performers who worked with Brando was his practice of deliberate emotional provocation, of creating real distress in co-stars and then harvesting that distress for use in his performance. Jessica Tandy, who originated the role of Blanche Dubois opposite Brando on Broadway in A Streetcar Named Desire, spoke in documented accounts about the experience of working beside him in terms that conveyed genuine and lasting unease. Brando's off-script escalations during takes left her, by her own account, shaken in ways that went beyond the ordinary demands of the material. The most honest thing that can be said about Brando's behavior is also the most troubling. He genuinely believed it served the work, not as a rationalization, but as a sincere artistic conviction. The performances he produced through these methods were, in their finest expressions, extraordinary. That belief provided complete internal justification for every cost that everyone around him paid. And it meant that unlike the stars who preceded him on this list, Brando was not cruel despite his talent. He was cruel through it. But we are 6 stories into a list of 15, and the names ahead include some of the most beloved figures in Hollywood history. What their co-stars said about them may be the most surprising thing you hear today. Stay with us, and make sure you are subscribed to Golden Age Files so you never miss another chapter of Hollywood's hidden history. The Saint with Claws. Marlon Brando believed his cruelty served the art. Our next star believed hers served God, and somehow that made it worse. Loretta Young was, by the carefully maintained standards of her public image, Hollywood's most genuinely virtuous star. The beauty was acknowledged by everyone. The talent had been recognized by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences with an Oscar for her work in The Farmer's Daughter in 1947. But it was the religiosity, the ostentatious, carefully displayed, publicly performed Catholic faith that defined her brand more completely than any other single element. Fan magazines described her in terms usually reserved for figures of genuine moral authority. She was gracious. She was devout. She was, the story went, living proof that genuine goodness could survive and even thrive within the compromised world of Hollywood. Then Celeste Holmes spoke. Holmes' credentials for offering an assessment of Loretta Young were unimpeachable. She was herself an Academy Award winner, recognized for her performance in Gentleman's Agreement in 1947. The same year, Young received her own Oscar. She was a professional of the first order, a woman whose opinion carried weight precisely because she had earned the right to hold one. And what she said, in documented interviews that have been widely reported across multiple sources, was this: that Loretta Young was among the least genuinely gracious women she had encountered in her entire career in Hollywood, that the warmth and the virtue were performances, that working with Young was an experience defined not by the kindness her public image promised, but by something considerably less charitable. The instrument that became most associated with Young's on-set behavior was the so-called fine jar, a container into which cast and crew members were required to deposit a small sum each time they used language that Young deemed inappropriate. Publicly, this was presented as a charming expression of her faith, a gentle reminder, delivered with good humor, that certain standards of conduct were expected in her presence. The people who experienced it on her sets described something different. They described an instrument of control, a mechanism by which Young established dominance over the professional environment, created a constant low-level anxiety about what might or might not trigger a fine, and positioned herself as the arbiter of acceptable behavior for everyone around her. What Holmes' account ultimately suggests, and what the testimony of others who worked with Young tends to confirm, is that Young's virtue was less a genuine expression of faith than a performance she had been giving for so long that she may have genuinely lost the ability to distinguish it from the real thing. A performance that required an audience to have meaning, and an audience that could be managed, corrected, and then fined for falling short of the standards she alone defined. Young's behavior hid behind the most perfect disguise available in Hollywood's golden age: the appearance of righteousness. Our next star's conduct hid behind something even more impenetrable, something that an entire nation had spent decades building and believed in absolutely. The legend who answered to no one. By the middle of the 1950s, John Wayne was not simply a movie star. He was an American institution, a cultural figure whose meaning to his audience extended far beyond any film he had ever appeared in, into questions of national identity, masculine virtue, and the values that Americans of that era most wanted to believe their country represented. His westerns and war pictures were not merely entertainment. They were mythology, and Wayne understood his position within that mythology with a clarity and a confidence that shaped everything he did, both on screen and off it. On set, that confidence expressed itself in ways that directors and co-stars found difficult to navigate and impossible to openly challenge. Wayne's habit of arriving to productions with revisions to the script, revisions that invariably affected his co-stars more significantly than they affected his own role, is documented across the accounts of directors who worked with him and in biographical examinations of his career, including Scott Iman's extensive study of his collaboration with director John Ford. The revisions were presented as suggestions. In practice, the distinction between suggestion and mandate was not one that anyone on set was in a position to meaningfully enforce. Wayne's cultural authority was too enormous, his standing in the industry too absolute, and the financial stakes of a Wayne production too significant for any director to risk a sustained confrontation over dialogue that Wayne had decided needed changing. The question that directors who worked with Wayne found themselves unable to answer was not whether his behavior was appropriate. It was whether there was any mechanism, any professional, contractual, or personal mechanism by which it could have been stopped. There was not. And the dynamic this created for female co-stars made that absence of accountability most visible. In the 1953 production of Hondo, the female lead, as originally written, possessed an independence and a moral authority that drove the story's central conflict. What appeared on screen was a considerably quieter character, one who waited rather than acted, and whose primary function was to confirm what the audience already knew about the man at the center of the frame. Multiple documented accounts from women who appeared opposite Wayne in major productions describe this same consistent pattern. Their characters, as written, possessed agency, intelligence, and the capacity to drive the narrative. In the versions of those scenes that appeared on screen, those qualities were frequently diminished in ways that were sometimes subtle and sometimes not. As the material was shaped through Wayne's revisions, his physical positioning, his timing, to ensure that the mythology remained centered where he believed it belonged, Maureen O'Hara was the exception that proved the rule. She appeared with Wayne in 5 films, including The Quiet Man and McClintock, and she was, by the testimony of everyone who observed their professional relationship, the only co-star who consistently matched his force of personality without flinching. Wayne respected her for it, in the way that a man of his particular formation could respect someone who refused to yield. And it was O'Hara, in her memoir, "'Tis Herself," who delivered the assessment that this chapter has been building toward. She wrote that John's greatest performance was convincing the world that he was identical to the characters he played on screen. The distance between the man and the myth, she observed, was offset considerable. Wayne reshaped every production around the mythology he embodied with complete and unquestioned confidence. Our next star required no such reshaping. His contempt for everyone around him was simply too genuine and too enormous to require any architecture at all. The genius no one could survive. Orson Welles arrived in Hollywood in 1939 with a contract from RKO Pictures that gave him a degree of creative autonomy unprecedented in the history of the studio system. The right to write, direct, produce, and star in his own productions with minimal interference. He was 24 years old. He had already transformed American radio with his Mercury Theater productions and was considered by many in the industry to be the most gifted creative intelligence to emerge in a generation. He was also, by the documented testimony of nearly every significant collaborator he ever had, among the most difficult human beings who ever drew breath in the state of California. The dispute over creative credit for the screenplay of Citizen Kane, the film Welles released in 1941, and which is still regularly cited as the greatest film ever made, is one of the most thoroughly examined controversies in Hollywood history, documented most rigorously in Robert Carringer's detailed study, The Making of Citizen Kane. Herman J. Mankiewicz, who co-wrote the screenplay with Welles, received shared credit only after a protracted dispute that went to the Screenwriters Guild. The question of how much of the film's extraordinary dialogue and narrative architecture originated with Mankiewicz, and how much with Welles remains genuinely contested. What is not contested is that Welles's initial position was that the credit should be his alone, and that the effort required to establish Mankiewicz's rightful place in the film's history was considerable. This pattern of absorbing and reshaping the contributions of collaborators in ways that left those collaborators feeling consumed rather than credited recurred throughout Welles's working life. His Mercury Theater actors, who had followed him from New York to Hollywood with genuine devotion, found the experience of working within his creative vision to be simultaneously exhilarating and depleting. Joseph Cotten, who remained among Welles's most loyal professional companions across multiple decades, reflected in his memoir, Vanity Will Get You Somewhere, on the nature of that working relationship. He wrote that working with Orson required the surrender of something that was not always fully recoverable, an acknowledgement from one of the people who had chosen to stay closest to him of the real cost that proximity to Welles's genius extracted. The most striking detail of Welles's later years is not that he was making commercials instead of films. It is that he was still, unmistakably, Orson Welles, still the most compelling presence in any room he entered, still capable of making a 30-second wine advertisement feel like an event. The talent never diminished. Only the canvas did. And the people who had watched him exhaust every opportunity he was ever given could not entirely escape the uncomfortable recognition that he had built the cage he was living in, one alienated collaborator at a time. The image that closes Welles's chapter in Hollywood history is one of the saddest the industry produced. A man of genuinely extraordinary gifts, gifts that the medium of film was perhaps uniquely suited to express, spent the second half of his career making wine commercials, appearing on late-night television programs, and pursuing projects that the studios he had alienated would not fund and that he consequently could not finish. His genius had consumed not just the collaborators who worked beside him. In the end, it consumed every opportunity he was ever given. And he never, by any account, fully understood why. We are now past the halfway point of our list, and I want to hear from you. Which of these revelations has surprised you most? And which Golden Age star would you like us to explore in a future documentary? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one. The director's nightmare. He was the coolest man in any room he ever entered. That was not an impression Humphrey Bogart cultivated through effort. It was simply the quality that came through the camera with an effortlessness that most actors spend entire careers attempting to manufacture. Sam Spade, Philip Marlowe, Rick Blaine in Casablanca, a performance so deeply embedded in American cultural memory that the film's final scene remains, more than 80 years after it was made. One of the most quoted and referenced moments in cinema history. Bogart was the archetype, the template, the actor who defined an entire register of masculine cool that the industry has been trying to replicate ever since. On set, he was something rather different from cool. His habit of consuming spirits before scenes that required emotional intimacy was, by the accounts of multiple people who worked with him, a consistent and deliberate practice. The effect it created for co-stars was a form of professional uncertainty that those who experienced it found deeply uncomfortable. The inability to know, from one take to the next, whether they were performing opposite the consummate professional or the provocateur, the man who had come to work or the man who had come to make work difficult. His targeting of younger and less established actors was, by the testimony of those who witnessed it, similarly consistent. The method was precise. He would wait, sometimes through an entire morning of filming, until a less experienced performer had built up sufficient confidence in a take to be genuinely committed to it. And then, at the moment of maximum vulnerability, he would deliver a remark timed with enough accuracy to shatter the concentration entirely. The remark itself was usually brief. The damage was not. Claire Trevor, who appeared opposite Bogart in Key Largo in 1948 and who won the Academy Award for Supporting Actress for that performance, spoke in documented accounts about the experience of working beside him, about the quality of unpredictability he brought to the set that made the preparation of her own performance more difficult than it needed to be. Director John Huston, who worked with Bogart on The Maltese Falcon, The African Queen, Key Largo, and The Treasure of the Sierra Madre, and who counted him as a genuine personal friend, offered in his memoir, An Open Book, what may be the most honest and most useful observation about Bogart's behavior available to us. He said, in essence, that Bogart needed an adversarial atmosphere to produce his best work, that some creative mechanism within him required conflict, required the friction of a set that was not entirely comfortable, not entirely safe, in order to function at the level he was capable of. And so he created that atmosphere, deliberately and consistently. Regardless of what it cost the people around him, the genius was real. So was the cost. Our next star needed not conflict, but something more total. Complete, uninterrupted, unconditional warmth from everyone in the room, delivered without reservation, at all times. America's sweetheart, nobody's friend. When Doris Day walked onto a set, something happened that directors spent years trying to describe accurately. The crew smiled, instinctively, automatically, the way you smile when someone you love walks into the room. She generated warmth the way some people generate noise, constantly, effortlessly, and apparently without trying. She was the top box office draw in America for 4 consecutive years between 1960 and 1964. She was beloved in a way that very few entertainers of any era managed to achieve, not simply admired or respected, but genuinely, warmly, personally beloved, as though each member of her audience had a private relationship with the woman on screen. The voice was a miracle. The warmth she projected in film after film was one of the most persuasive things the cinema of that period produced. Then, the cameras stopped rolling. Co-stars and crew members who worked with Doris Day across her long career described, in accounts that accumulated over years, a consistent and somewhat disorienting experience. The warmth switching off with an abruptness that those who witnessed it found difficult to forget. Not becoming cold, precisely. Not hostile or harsh in the manner of some of the names that have already appeared on this list. Simply absent. The Doris Day who existed between takes, between scenes, between productions, was a figure who maintained a professional cordiality and nothing beyond it. A woman who had drawn a line between what she gave on camera and what she was willing to offer anywhere else, and who maintained that boundary with the same absolute consistency that she brought to every other aspect of her professional life. Yes, what made Day's emotional withdrawal particularly difficult for those around her was that it was not consistent. On rare occasions, documented by multiple people who worked with her closely, something would break through. A moment of genuine, unguarded warmth that was so different from her professional cordiality that those who experienced it found it almost more difficult to process than the habitual distance. It suggested that the warmth was not entirely constructed, that somewhere behind the professional boundary was a person who was capable of connection, but had, for reasons she never publicly discussed, decided that the cost of offering it was too high. Rock Hudson, who appeared opposite Day in Pillow Talk, Lover Come Back, and Send Me No Flowers, 3 productions that generated some of the most beloved on-screen chemistry of the entire era, spoke in his memoir, compiled with Sarah Davidson and published as Rock Hudson, his story about the experience of working with her across those years. What he said, with the candor that characterized much of that book, was that despite the warmth and the apparent ease of their work together, despite the closeness that their on-screen partnership conveyed so convincingly, he barely knew her. That after multiple films and considerable shared professional time, the Doris Day he experienced off-camera remained a figure he could not access, could not approach, and had eventually ceased attempting to reach. Those who examined her career most carefully arrived at an observation that is perhaps the most generous interpretation available, that Day was among the most technically precise performers of her generation, and that the warmth her audiences experienced was entirely genuine within a scene precisely because she was fully committing to it as a performance. When the performance ended, there was nothing being held in reserve because nothing had been held in reserve. She gave everything she had to the camera. Off camera, there was simply nothing remaining to give. It is a melancholy portrait rather than a damning one. The woman who made the world feel warmly understood may have been one of its lonelier inhabitants. Our next star made absolutely no attempt at warmth, and the contempt he felt for those around him was delivered with the full authority of the greatest classical actor who ever lived. The man who made directors weep. Laurence Olivier, was at the theater, not a representative of it, not a practitioner of it. In the minds of his generation and the generation that followed, he was its living embodiment. The Shakespeare productions at the Old Vic, the film adaptations of Henry V and Hamlet and Richard III that brought the classical repertoire to international audiences who had never set foot in a theater. The knighthood, the peerage. By the time Olivier arrived on a Hollywood set, he arrived trailing behind him the entire weight of 4 centuries of English dramatic tradition, and he was not unaware of this fact. Neither were the American performers who found themselves working beside him. Olivier's contempt for method acting, the approach developed by Lee Strasberg at the Actors Studio that had produced Brando and James Dean, and a generation of American film performers who worked from the inside out, from emotional memory and psychological truth, was neither secret nor occasional. It was a considered aesthetic position, documented in his memoir Confessions of an Actor, and expressed throughout his professional life with a consistency that suggested genuine conviction. He believed that acting was a technical craft, that the job of a performer was to create the appearance of emotion through skill and discipline, not to manufacture actual emotion through psychological excavation. The Americans were, in his view, doing it wrong. And he was not shy about saying so. Joan Fontaine's experience during the filming of Rebecca in 1940 provides a window into how Olivier's disdain could be directed against a specific performer. Fontaine was young, relatively inexperienced in film, and working opposite both Olivier and director Alfred Hitchcock, 2 of the most formidable creative intelligences in the industry, simultaneously. Hitchcock made the decision, documented in Fontaine's memoir No Bed of Roses, to keep her isolated from the rest of the cast, believing that her character's social anxiety would be best served by her experiencing something of that anxiety genuinely. Olivier, rather than counteracting this isolation with any warmth or professional generosity, amplified it through his own sustained withdrawal, where the result was a performance of genuine and affecting fragility. The cost of producing that performance was borne entirely by Fontaine, but it is the exchange with Dustin Hoffman on the set of Marathon Man in 1976 that has traveled furthest through Hollywood history, and that illuminates Olivier's professional character most completely. Hoffman, preparing for a scene in which his character would be visibly exhausted and distressed, had remained awake for 3 consecutive days in order to authentically inhabit that condition. When Olivier arrived on set and was informed of this preparation, he responded with the question that became one of the most repeated observations in the history of film production: "Have you tried acting, dear boy?" The exchange is almost universally retold as a charming anecdote, an amusing collision between 2 theatrical philosophies, delivered by a witty Englishman with impeccable timing. The people who were present when it was delivered have, in various documented accounts, suggested that the wit was genuine and that the timing was impeccable. They have also indicated, with somewhat more consistency, that it was not delivered as a joke. Olivier's contempt was cold, intellectual, and precisely measured. Our next 2 chapters bring us to the most consequential stories on this entire list, beginning with a star whose behavior away from the camera was so extreme that an entire studio built a permanent infrastructure around concealing it. The star the studio protected at any cost. From the very first minute of this documentary, one name has been waiting. On one story that we promised you, about a star whose behavior was so extreme that Warner Brothers did not merely manage the fallout. They built a permanent operation around preventing it from ever reaching you at all. That name is Errol Flynn, and the studio was right to be worried. No actor of Hollywood's golden age possessed more natural charisma than Errol Flynn. This is not a promotional claim. It is the consistent testimony of virtually everyone who ever worked with him or observed him at close range. The camera found in Flynn something that it finds in very few performers in any generation: an absolute ease, a quality of dangerous charm, a suggestion of genuine adventure behind the eyes that made audiences believe, completely and immediately, that the swashbuckling heroes he played were not performances, but simply the man himself, barely contained by the frame. His work in Captain Blood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and The Dawn Patrol made him one of the most beloved stars of the 1930s and 1940s. His appeal was, by any measure, extraordinary. What Warner Brothers spent years managing, with the full resources of one of Hollywood's most powerful studios, was the growing body of evidence about his conduct toward women, particularly toward young women in vulnerable professional positions who lacked the standing or the resources to effectively push back against him or to be heard if they tried. In 1942, Flynn faced 2 separate legal proceedings involving allegations of misconduct toward underage women. Both cases went to trial. Both resulted in acquittal. and the studio's involvement in managing those trials, in marshaling legal resources, shaping public relations strategy, and ensuring that Flynn's image survived the proceedings as intact as possible, is documented across multiple studio histories and biographies of the period. The acquittals did not resolve the underlying questions. They simply ensured that those questions would not be the ones the public was asked to consider. Olivia de Havilland appeared with Flynn in 8 films, a professional partnership that produced some of the most beloved screen chemistry of the entire era. And that made the two of them, in the public imagination, one of Hollywood's great romantic pairings. De Havilland was, and remained throughout a very long life, a figure of unimpeachable personal integrity and professional credibility. And in carefully worded reflections documented across multiple late-life interviews, she said this, that the Errol Flynn she performed opposite was the most magnetically charismatic presence she encountered in her entire career. And that this fact, she said, made what she knew about him away from the camera all the more painful to carry. She did not elaborate beyond that. She did not need to. The weight of what she was not saying was fully present in what she chose to say. Flynn's story is one of extraordinary talent and documented darkness existing in almost equal and deeply uncomfortable measure. Our final 2 chapters bring us to stories more complicated still, because unlike anyone else on this list, the chaos they created came not from cruelty or calculation, but from something far harder to judge. With the set that nearly burned down, everyone who ever worked with Marilyn Monroe wanted to protect her. This is not a retrospective sentiment shaped by the heartbreak of how her story concluded. It was the immediate, instinctive response of directors, producers, co-stars, and crew members who encountered her in person, a response generated by something she projected, something the camera caught and amplified into the most luminous screen presence of her generation, that made people feel simultaneously that she needed protection and that she was entirely beyond anyone's ability to provide it. The production of Some Like It Hot in 1958 has become the most thoroughly documented example of what working with Monroe at the height of both her fame and her difficulties actually meant for everyone else involved. Director Billy Wilder, who had worked with some of the most demanding performers in the history of Hollywood and whose patience was by any standard considerable, reached the limits of that patience multiple times during the production and documented those experiences in interviews that he gave over subsequent decades with the candor of a man who had fully processed what he had been through. The scene that has passed into Hollywood legend required Monroe to enter a room, open a series of drawers, and deliver the line, "Where's the bourbon?" The scene was filmed 59 times before Wilder had a take he considered usable. 59 times Monroe either delivered the line incorrectly, lost her concentration, or was simply not present in the way the scene required. The financial cost of those 59 takes was considerable. The cost to the morale and patience of everyone else on set was, by multiple accounts, even more significant. Tony Curtis, who appeared opposite Monroe throughout the production in a physically and professionally demanding role, made a remark about the experience that has been widely reported and confirmed across multiple sources, a remark whose precise wording was deliberately extreme and that conveyed, in the most concentrated possible form, the experience of performing at the highest level of one's craft opposite someone who was not, in any reliable sense, available to perform beside you. And yet, Wilder, in that same body of interviews, said something else. Something that complicated every harsh judgment the production earned and every difficult thing that was said about Monroe during and after it. He said that despite everything, despite the 59 takes and the cost and the chaos and the days when nothing was possible and the mornings when she simply did not appear, he said he would work with her again. Because what the camera discovered when it found Marilyn Monroe, the quality it located in her that no amount of technical difficulty could diminish or erase, was simply unlike anything else the cinema had produced. She was, in front of the lens, irreplaceable. Co-star Eli Wallach, who appeared alongside Monroe in The Misfits in 1960, the last film she completed, offered the account that perhaps comes closest to the truth of who she was and what working beside her actually meant. Monroe did not make sets difficult because she was harsh. She did not create chaos because she was calculating or indifferent or contemptuous of the people who depended on her showing up. She created it because she was genuinely, profoundly struggling, because the internal weather she lived within was so extreme that ordinary professional functioning was, on many days, simply beyond what was available to her. The chaos was not a performance. It was, Wallach suggested, the most honest thing about her. The one place where the gap between the public face and the private reality finally disappeared. Marilyn Monroe endured in ways the camera could see. Our final star endured in ways the industry deliberately refused to acknowledge. Because what was done to Ingrid Bergman was not an accident or a scandal. It was a policy. But when it was carried out with the full force of the most powerful entertainment system in the world. The woman Hollywood could never forgive. If you were to design, from the ground up, the perfect Hollywood actress for American audiences of the 1940s, the performer who embodied most completely the qualities that those audiences most wanted to find in the women on their screens, you would produce someone very close to Ingrid Bergman. The Swedish-born actress who had come to America and made herself into one of its most beloved screen presences possessed a quality that her contemporaries struggled to name precisely. It was not simply beauty, though the beauty was genuine and considerable. It was not simply talent, though the talent was equally genuine and considerably greater. And it was something like nobility, a quality of moral seriousness, of evident interior depth, that made the audiences who watched her feel that they were in the presence of someone genuinely good. Her role as a nun in The Bells of St. Mary's, her portrayal of the self-sacrificing Ilsa in Casablanca, her work in For Whom the Bell Tolls. Film after film had built and reinforced an image of Bergman as the antithesis of the typical Hollywood glamour machine, a woman of genuine virtue in an industry not always noted for producing it. The public did not merely admire her, they trusted her. They believed in her. In 1949, Bergman traveled to Italy to make a film with director Roberto Rossellini. She fell in love with him. She became pregnant with his child while still married to her first husband. And when this became public knowledge, the response from the American press, the American public, and, extraordinarily, the American government was so swift and so severe that it would define the remaining trajectory of her career and reshape the conversation about what Hollywood expected from its female stars. Senator Edwin C. Johnson of Colorado rose on the floor of the United States Senate to formally denounce Bergman by name. His remarks, which are part of the public congressional record, described her in terms of genuine moral condemnation, as an influence for corruption, as a woman who had betrayed the trust of the audiences who had believed in her. Churches across America called for organized actions against her films. The fan correspondence that had once celebrated her reversed itself almost entirely. And the Hollywood studios that had built careers and fortunes on Bergman's image closed their doors to her with a speed that made clear how conditional their support had always been. She was, for all practical purposes, exiled from the American film industry for 7 years. The detail that must not be lost in this account, the detail that your audience deserves to hold clearly in their minds as they consider what happened to Ingrid Bergman, is this. Male stars throughout this same period engaged in behavior identical to or considerably more extreme than hers without facing professional consequences of any comparable kind. The unequal standard was not hidden. It was the architecture of the system itself, expressed with perfect clarity in what happened to one of the most gifted actresses the American cinema had ever claimed as its own. Or Bergman made her return in 1956 with Anastasia, a performance for which she received her second Academy Award. When she appeared at the ceremony in 1959 to present an award, the audience rose. The standing ovation that followed suggested that the industry had moved, however slowly, however imperfectly, toward something that might be called grace. Her daughter, Isabella Rossellini, who became a celebrated actress and public figure in her own right, has spoken in multiple documented interviews about her mother's years in Europe with a perspective that the public reception of those years entirely missed. The exile was professionally devastating. It was also, Isabella has said, the period of her mother's greatest artistic freedom. The years when Hollywood's constraints fell away and Bergman was able to make work and live a life that the studio system would never have offered and would never willingly have allowed. The woman who was condemned for following her heart found, in the place beyond that condemnation, something that looked considerably like herself. Hollywood spent decades building something extraordinary. Not just the films, not just the performances, but the belief that the people delivering them were somehow larger than ordinary human experience, more graceful, more certain, more complete. The studio system was, at its core, a machine for producing that belief and protecting it from anything that might complicate it. And what the co-stars and directors and crew members who finally spoke understood, and what this documentary has tried to honor, is that the complication is not the betrayal. It is a gift, because the stars who were difficult and brilliant, frightened and magnetic, demanding and irreplaceable, are not lesser for being human. There are more. They earned something that the carefully managed version of them could never have earned. The right to be known as they actually were, rather than as the machine needed them to appear. You loved them before you knew any of this. The question worth sitting with, as the credits roll and the names settle, is whether you love them more now or less. Most people who have spent time with these stories find the answer is more, not despite what they now know, because of it. And if this documentary has given you something worth keeping, share it with someone who would value it. Like the video so that others can find it. And subscribe to Golden Age Files, because there are more stories where these came from. More names. More silence that was kept for too long. More truth that the studios buried and that the people who were there deserve to have told. This is the Golden Age Files. Thank you for watching, and for caring enough about these extraordinary, complicated, beautifully imperfect human beings to stay until the end.